How many of you know that the United States is the largest economy in the world? Did you know that? Yeah, we're the largest economy in the world. Out of all the nations on the earth, many with populations that are much larger than ours, we are the country that has the largest economy. And depending on how one looks at it, which metrics you choose to look at, the United States is not always at the top of all of the list regarding affluence and wealth in the world. There are nations that, depending on how you look at the numbers, fare a little bit better. But when everything gets factored in, I think it's fairly safe to say, I at least think most of us feel that what I'm about to say is true, that we live in perhaps the most affluent nation that has ever existed in the history of mankind. We have the largest economy. We have incredible economic opportunity. Our standard of living, at least in terms of the houses we live in and the stuff we have, is staggeringly affluent. I mean, we often complain about how the middle class gets squeezed, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. But if you look at the lifestyle of just the average person in the United States and then compare it to the lifestyle of the average person in the rest of the world, it's really incredible the stuff that average people are able to have in our nation. We are staggeringly affluent. But within this very affluent nation, the fact is there are a lot of broke people. We're going to have more fun this week, just like we did last week. Consider just a few of these stats. According to the Washington Post, 4 in 10 adults in the United States don't have enough money set back to cover a $400 unexpected expense. According to one survey I found, 57% of American adults have less than $1,000 in savings, with 32% of American adults having nothing in savings. Only 15% having between $1,000 and $5,000 in savings, 7% having between $5,000 and $10,000 in savings, and 21% having more than $10,000 in savings. Not only do Americans not have much in savings, but we also carry an awful lot of debt. According to an article in USA Today, here's the average household debt in the United States. $16,883 on credit cards, $29,539 on automobile loans, $50,626 on student loans, and $182,421 on mortgage. Little or no savings and a lot of debt. And that describes many people, it describes many households in the United States of America. And I don't think you need me to take any more time to build the case that Americans have too little savings and too much debt. I think that we all sort of understand that this is the reality for a whole lot of people. Most of us know people who live in really beautiful homes, drive really nice cars, take great vacations, but they struggle to keep the electric on. They struggle with any unexpected bill that comes up, and they often put their Christmas shopping on a credit card. And some of us know of those kind of people because they're us. They're us. Now, I always want to allow for exceptions because I do believe there are exceptions. I always want to allow for those exceptions where someone not having savings and having a lot of debt is due to circumstances beyond their control. Because I do believe that there are such things. I do believe that there are times when that is absolutely the case depending on the circumstances of a person's life. Something completely out of their control has left them financially vulnerable, has left them financially in a very difficult place. That absolutely does happen. And if that's the case with you, I want you to know that I recognize that as we enter into this message today. But the truth is that for the vast majority of people that have little to no savings and a lot of debt, the issue is not circumstances out of their control, but a failure to live below their means, which simply means that they have chosen to live in a way where they spend everything they earn, and in many cases, more than what they earn. When we fail to live below our means, we set ourselves up for financial struggle. We set ourselves up for financial difficulty. We even set ourselves up for financial ruin. Last week, as we started this series on biblical financial principles, we considered the first and most important biblical financial principle, which is honor God first. Honor God in your finances first. And today we're looking at another very important biblical financial principle. It is incredibly important for financial health. In order to use God's money in a way that pleases Him, and in order to handle the money God has entrusted to us in a way that reduces our own financial stress and helps us to avoid financial vulnerability, we have to learn to live below our means. We have to be willing to live a lifestyle that is lower than what our income would permit if we committed our entire income to our lifestyle. Here's what Proverbs 21:20 says. In the house of the wise are stores of choice food and oil. Just read it as resources. In the house of the wise there are stores of choice food and oil, but a foolish man devours all he has. The meaning of the proverb is very clear. Those who are wise don't use up all of their resources. They don't use up everything. And so they are able to set some stuff aside so that they begin to accumulate some savings. They have some extra. They don't use it all. They live on less than what they produce. In contrast, the foolish person devours everything that he has. Nothing gets set aside. Nothing gets saved for a rainy day. Nothing gets put back to cover the lean times or to have enough to help someone else. Everything they get, they use. Everything they earn, they consume. And the Proverbs warns against that way of living, and it commends those who resist that temptation and choose not to devour everything that they produce. Choose not to use up everything that they have. Here's how I want to approach this topic today. I want to start by sharing some very practical advice. Now, for many of you here today, this advice is going to be very elementary. It actually is probably going to seem elementary to pretty much all of us here today. But I have little doubt that for a number of us here, while the advice might be familiar and might even seem elementary, the truth is we haven't actually applied it to our own lives. And so really, how elementary is it if we haven't done it? If we haven't done it. So I'm appealing to you today that even if you feel like, yeah, I know all that stuff, if you're not actually doing that stuff, what I hope you'll do today is not dismiss this, but that you will consider the message today a nudge from the Lord to actually put into practice these things you know, but you haven't done. Now, for some of us here today, if you're younger and you're just starting out, you might actually come upon a new idea that I share today. And for all of you who know all of this stuff and you have it down, I hope that you won't check out as well. You can feel the pleasure of affirmation throughout the sermon, and you can nod along knowingly and approvingly. And then after these few pieces of really practical advice are shared, then what I want to do toward the end is, for just a few minutes, I want to get to some of the heart issues that contribute to us consuming everything we have and failing to live below our means. Okay? So that's how we're going to approach this. So first, some practical applications of the wisdom of Proverbs 21:20. Here is the first one. From your very first paycheck that you ever receive. There might be a few of you in here who haven't earned a paycheck yet. You're about to. Some of you have been earning a paycheck for just a short time. You can do this. From your very first paycheck, learn to live on 20% less than what you earn. It should probably really be 30%. But start at 20. Prove to yourself that you can do it. And then work up to 30. The 20%, I believe, should be allocated in the following way. 10% should be given to the work of the Lord. Amen. We touched on that last week. We honor God first. I personally believe we have little to no hope of handling our money right as Christians if we don't learn to honor God first. So we honor God first. And then after we've done that, we commit 10% of everything we make to savings. Again, it should probably be 30%. And the truth is that there's no better time to establish this discipline than from your first paycheck. So if you haven't earned a paycheck yet, or you're really early in your earning life, you can start at 30%. You really could. And if you start that way from the very beginning, you never know anything different than that. And so in that case, you would give 10% to the work of the Lord, and you would save 20%. Okay. If every Christian would simply make this commitment from our first paycheck and carry it through our entire lives, the good that would result from this would be absolutely incredible. First of all, the work of the Lord would always have more than enough money to fund the mission of the church in the world. And then each of us individually would very likely, the odds are really good, that we would live lives with very little financial stress. And then we would get to retirement with enough money to keep us during retirement and leave a financial legacy for our family. The younger you are, the easier it is to get started with this. And so I am hoping that many of you who are younger will hear me today and begin to work to apply this in your life. And so if you're just getting ready for your first job, commit to do this. Again, you will never know anything different, and it will completely alter the course of your financial life. Some of you here today, you're already past your first paycheck, but maybe you've just been in the workforce for a few years. Maybe you're still living at home, or in some other way, your financial obligations are still quite low, much lower than they're going to be in just a few years. And so I appeal to you to suck it up. Make this commitment now. It will absolutely change your life. And if you're like many of us, you've already got a lot of bills. You've already got a lot of financial obligations. The truth is, it's going to be a lot harder to do this. It's going to be a lot harder. But come up with a plan. Take Financial Peace University. Do something to start taking practical steps that can eventually get you to that point. It can be done, and it will change your life for the better. Here's the second practical application of Proverbs 21:20. If you're a two-income family, live off of one income, if at all possible. Don't allow yourself to become dependent on the second income for your basic expenses. Now, I say if at all possible because I recognize it's tough out there. The economy is good. We live in an affluent nation, but things are expensive. I recognize this. And I am personally always stunned by how much money it takes to just live a sort of middle-of-the-road, middle-class life. In this country, it takes a lot of money to do that. So I recognize this may not always be possible. Don't feel under any kind of, condemnation or anything if it's not possible. But if it is possible, commit to live on one income. And again, the earlier you are in your journey, the more realistic it is for you to do this. If you're not married yet, this should be a discussion that you have between you and your spouse, your future spouse. How do we order our lives so that we can live off one of our paychecks and not be dependent on the second one for our basic expenses? If you're already married, but your financial obligations are low right now, make this choice and make the changes that you have to make to be able to live this way. Choose to live on substantially less than you can make. Now, the next one, I have to admit that I do not have much credibility with the first half of it. Just being honest. But it's still good advice. Eat out and entertain yourself less than what you can afford. Almost every source I looked up this week regarding financial advice for living below your means mentioned eating out and entertainment, especially eating out. How many of you agree with me that eating out is an absolutely wonderful and delightful thing? Pretty much everybody. I know there are a couple of you that don't like eating out, and I don't frankly know what's wrong with you. But it's good for you that you don't, but I like, me no comprehend. I don't understand. Eating out is a wonderful thing. If you select well, the food is good. And for me, that means I should usually allow Michelle to select my meal, because I always like hers better than my own. One of the truly delightful things about eating out is that someone else prepares it. The most delightful thing about it is that someone else cleans it up. And you're able to just sit there and enjoy people. So I love it. It's a great thing. But it has its disadvantages, especially in large quantities. The big disadvantage is that it costs about 325% more per person to eat out than it does to eat at home. That's the really big disadvantage. The top link of my Google search this week on this topic claims that it costs about $4 per person per meal to eat at home. So if you think about eating out at a restaurant, what I'm about to tell you is actually sort of, low. But, let's say you can find an $8 meal, and that's increasingly hard to do. But let's say you can find an $8 meal, and now you're going to add a drink to it, a soft drink, and that's going to, that was a laugh line and you missed it. But anyway, a soft drink, that's going to cost you about $3 now, which isn't that insane. So that's going to cost you about $3. Then you add your tax and tip to that, and you're not going to get out of there as an individual for less than $13 to $15. So let's go with 13, because that's what my Google example went with. So let's go with 13. At $13, the meal out costs 325% more than eating at home, $4 per person. At that cost, eating at home saves $9 per person per meal. And so for a family of 4, it's a matter of a home meal for $16 or a meal out for $52. The convenience is wonderful. The cost difference is crazy. And it undermines the commitment to living below your means. And most of us are probably losing hundreds of dollars per month by simply eating out more than what we should. Now, if your income supports that and you can still live below your means by doing that, I'm not going to tell you not to, but for many of us, that is one of the main things that is preventing us from living below our means. And if it's doing that, then it's way too costly for us to be eating out. The next one I feel very passionately about. Don't buy the house the bank says you can afford. Buy the least expensive house that you're willing to live in. If you have good credit, even after the housing crisis of 10 years ago, the bank is almost always going to be willing to give you more money than what you should spend on a house. I believe that we should keep the economic impact of our housing situation as low as possible by living in the least expensive house that we are willing to occupy. I did not expect many amens today, but I did expect more than I've received. Now, this is challenging to apply. It really is. Have you seen the housing prices out there? This is challenging to apply. Even houses that would have at one time been more affordable, like meaning houses that aren't very nice, they're expensive now. I'm amazed at houses that I see, like, it's not even a nice house. That's $250,000. It's tough out there. I understand this. I really do understand this. It's tough. But the principle applies no matter what the housing market is. Right. It really does. So if the bank tells you that you can afford a $300,000 house, choose a $275,000 house. If the bank tells you you can afford $275,000, buy a $225,000 house. If the bank tells you you can afford $225,000, buy a $175,000 house. You get the idea. You get the idea. It may still be more expensive out there than any of us can really wrap our brains around, but the principle applies. Buy less than what the bank says you can buy. When Michelle and I bought our first house in the Columbus area, we bought an even less expensive house in Lima, Ohio for the 3 months that we lived there. That's a different story. But when we bought our first house in Columbus, the average price of a home in the suburbs at that time, this is just from memory, I might be a little off, but I think it was somewhere in the range of probably $150,000, $160,000, $170,000. And we bought our house in Eastmore for $71,000. Our payment was less than half of what it became when we finally, a few years later, did move to the suburbs. Now, at that time, it's been 23 years ago. And at that time, even at that time, Eastmore was not like the greatest place in the world to live by the way a lot of people look at things. I mean, we would tell people we lived in Eastmore, and it would be like, oh, really? Yes, we live in Eastmore, and we like Eastmore. But they seemed to be disapproving. So we would get those interesting responses. But I'll tell you what, the house itself was great. It was modest, but it was great. I say to this day, if I could move that house to Pataskala, I'd buy it right now. Of course, in Pataskala, it'd cost $300,000. So I wouldn't buy it. But We bought that house for $71,000. It was great. And here was the really great thing about it. It provided flexibility for us. It provided some space in our budget. And here's one of the things that was really wonderful about that house. We could afford that house on any old job we could find. We just didn't need to make much money. No pressure. We could afford that house by both of us donning blue vests and saying hi to people that walk into Walmart. It just did not take a lot of money for us to be able to afford that house. Now, it's more difficult now, I think, than it was back then. That $71,000 house is probably worth $110,000 today. But of course, the average house in the suburbs is probably up to $230,000, $240,000. So again, the principle still works. The principle still works. Now, to be completely honest about the story, once we had kids, the helicopters with the spotlights flying over our house became a bigger issue. and so we did end up moving to the suburbs. That's why I say, buy the least expensive house you're willing to live in. It's an acknowledgement that you have a certain threshold of, I have to have this, and I think that's okay. Now, some of you may disagree with this advice. I know there was a time when the advice was, buy as much house as you can afford because you'll grow into it and the house is just going to keep appreciating. Some of you may still believe that. We can just respectfully disagree. I really believe you should buy the least expensive house you're willing to live in and go from there. Here's the final Proverbs 21:20 motivated application for today. This applies to those of you who are younger or to those of you who are older and you're considering returning to college. Here it is. Go to an affordable college so that you'll have little or no debt after graduation. If you get grants or scholarships, by all means, go wherever you want to go as long as those sources cover all or most of the cost. But if you're footing most of the cost of your education yourself, the wisdom of Proverbs 21:20 would tell us that we simply cannot go into massive amounts of debt for our education. No debt should be the goal. But that might not be realistic in your circumstances. In my own family, we have set a limit that we're not going to take on any more debt for the college educations of our children, any more debt than the cost of a modest car. While we'd prefer no debt, as we assess things, that was not doable for us. And so we set this limit because the cost of a modest car can be repaid within just a few years without completely wrecking a budget. But coming out of college with $70,000, $80,000, $100,000 worth of debt, I say this kindly, but it is a violation of the godly wisdom of Proverbs 21:20. It really is. It is also a violation of common sense because it will wreck your financial life for years to come. Now, if you're going to college to be a doctor, or you're entering some other really high-paying profession, perhaps you can justify it. But most of us simply cannot justify that kind of debt for college with the sort of careers that we're choosing to go into. We just can't do it. And so, take longer to get through school. Go to a less expensive school. Do whatever you have to do to avoid a lot of college debt. So all of these are practical applications of Proverbs 21:20, ways to apply that verse to our lives in 2019. But how do we do this? How do we do this? How do we live on 80% of our income instead of 100%? How do we live on one income when we have two incomes? How do we eat out less when our income actually would enable us to eat out more? How do we do that? How do we live in a nice house, a less nice house than what our income would allow us to live in? How do we restrain ourselves from going away to a prestigious school that's going to leave us $100,000 in debt instead of just commuting down to OUL and going to school there, ending up with little or no debt? How do we do that? Here's the answer. The answer to every one of those questions is contentment. Contentment. Contentment is the key to living below our means. Here's what contentment is. It is a state of happiness and satisfaction. It's being happy and satisfied with one's life situation as it is right now. Contentment is when we're able to live on 80% of our income. Contentment is when we're satisfied with the things that one income will buy us instead of two. Contentment is being happy with eating out 6 times a month instead of 20 times a month. Contentment is when we're happy in a small house and we don't need a big house. Contentment is being happy with a degree from OUL and not needing a degree from a prestigious school in order to feel satisfied. Contentment is being happy and satisfied with how life is right now, even if you're denying yourself something that you'd like to have and that you actually could afford if you chose to put everything you've earned toward affording it. And I want to highlight 3 things about contentment from the Bible. And here's the first one. It is possible to be content with less than you can afford. Amen. That really is possible. Said another way, it is possible to be content with your life as it is right now, even if everything isn't exactly the way you'd prefer it to be, even if you are denying yourself something you really want so that you can live below your means. Contentment is possible. The Apostle Paul wrote about this in Philippians 4:11 through 13. Here's what he said. I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do everything through Him who gives me strength. This verse tells us 2 important things. First of all, it tells us that contentment is possible, and then it tells us that the source of true contentment is Christ. Christ is the Him that Paul refers to. Paul says he learned to be content, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. Now, for the vast majority of us here today, I would dare to say for every single one of us here today, our circumstances are not even approaching the dramatic nature of Paul's circumstances. They're just not. Few of us in this room ever have or are currently experiencing true hunger. I mean, maybe it's happened for someone, but most of us in this room probably have never and are not right now experiencing true hunger. Few of us have had experiences where we have been in the kind of lack for material comforts like the Apostle Paul did, like he faced throughout his ministry. If Paul learned to be content, even when he was truly hungry, surely we can be content with eating out 6 times a month instead of 20. Surely we can be content with somehow living in an 1,800 square foot house instead of a 2,800 square foot house. Surely we can be content on 80% of our income instead of 100%. Contentment is a key to living below our means, and contentment is possible. You realize our entire marketing world is entirely set up to make you discontented. We are bombarded with messages that tempt us toward being discontented. But contentment is possible. Another thought that should be able to help us with contentment: we need to always remember that we are leaving this world the exact same way that we entered it, which is empty-handed. 1 Timothy 6:6-8 says this: "Godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into this world, and we can take nothing out of it." It's not like that's our choice. I mean, it's not saying, hey, people just choose not to take. We can't take anything out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. And then it goes on and warns against the love of money. That text lets us know there is a connection between remembering we can't take anything with us and contentment. There is. It does tremendous help to us when we set things in their proper perspective, when we put things in their proper place. Do you realize some of the really odd things that Americans convince themselves of? And please believe, I'm not wagging my finger at you. I am talking to myself today as much as anybody in this room. But we convince ourselves of some of the oddest things. Things like this: man, I cannot put up with this 50-inch TV another second. Have you seen the 65, 70, 75-inch TVs they have at Sam's Club now? They don't even cost that much, really. I must have a 65 or 70-inch TV. 50 inches is just too small. That's what I get the amen on. So it's on sale. So it wasn't that long ago. I forget what the year was, but I didn't plan to tell you this. So my goodness, we're not good on time anymore. So I shouldn't tell you this story, but I'm going to real quick. So I don't know, it was sometime probably maybe as late as close to 2009, 2010, we still had a 32-inch box TV in our house. And those of you who remember Jason Kepi was over at my house, and we were watching a football game together. And we're in the middle of a football game, just visiting, having a good time, enjoying one another. And suddenly, out of the blue, Jason sits up on the edge of my couch, looks over at me, and says, "Dude, your TV sucks." And so we promptly went to Target and got a 40-inch flat screen TV. And then in just a few years, it was like, this TV is so tiny. We need another one. Now, if we can buy a 70-inch TV and still honor God and still live below our means, then great. Go buy the 70-inch TV. But if buying it means spending everything we have, if it means we're spending at or above our means, then convincing ourselves that a 50-inch TV is a hardship is really kind of ridiculous. And it's revealed as even more ridiculous when we remember this: that TV is just another thing that's not going to be going with me when I leave this world. How important is it really? Not much. Not much. Here's the third thing about contentment. a third thought to help us toward contentment. Don't worry about the Joneses. Luke 12:15 says, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." Most of us have someone in our lives, an acquaintance, a family member, a long-lost friend we reconnected with on Facebook, and their life looks like the life that we have always dreamed about. They are living our dream life. Their house is a higher quality than ours. We have vinyl siding. They have brick and stucco. Their deck and landscaping is perfect. They have their own perfect pool. And they have a full court, basketball court, and tennis court in their backyard. Their decorating is perfect. All of their clothes come from Nordstrom instead of TJ Maxx. We vacation in Amish country. They vacation in Peru and Spain and Norway. We have our horrible, embarrassing 50-inch TV. And they have a 120-inch TV with 12 leather recliners in their dedicated media room. And we are tempted to covet what they have. And in those moments, we have to commit Luke 12:15 to memory so that we have it available in those moments. You see that, and you remind yourself, take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Sometimes such people make us feel like failures. We've not achieved enough. And we see what they have and we're tempted to try to attain at least a few of the things that they have. To buy at least a few of the things that might match the quality of the stuff that they have. And anytime we covet and then we buy based on that coveting, we have made a huge mistake. Because life isn't about all that stuff. And can I remind us of something here today? Of those people who live like that, there absolutely are people that can do that and still live below their means. There are. Very high earning people. They can attain that lifestyle and still handle their money in a perfectly responsible way. But let me tell you another reality. Often, these people whose lives look like that, the proverbial Joneses, not the Joneses we actually know, they are wonderful people, but the proverbial Joneses, often they have all that stuff, not because they can really afford it, but because they're idiots. Don't worry about the Joneses first and foremost, because what they have says nothing about your life and your worth as a person. But also because the Joneses are nuts. They have no business having all that stuff themselves. And often they are a case study in what not to do because they have a wonderful lifestyle, but their financial foundation is just a complete mess. A shaky financial foundation. So contentment is possible. Remember, we leave this world the same way we enter it. Don't worry about the Joneses. Now, I recognize I'm going a little long today. I appeal with you to stay with me. Keep in mind, an hour and a half really is not a long time. And 15 more minutes is not a real long time either. Let's put this in its proper perspective as well. So we try real hard, and I know all of this I'm saying is just making it worse, but we try real hard to get you out of here by 11:30. Today it's going to be just a little bit later. So bear with us. Contentment is possible. We leave this world the same way we enter it. Don't worry about the Joneses. So the key to living below our means is contentment. Now, here's the most important thing I'm going to say today. The most important thing I'm going to say today. The key to contentment is Jesus. The key to contentment is Jesus. That's what Paul told us. He could be content because of Christ. We can finally be content at the point in our lives when Jesus becomes our true Lord and we place our full trust in Him. Matthew 6:24 says, "No one can serve two masters. Either he'll hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." In this verse, Jesus presents money as a rival God. He presents money as competing with God for our devotion and I'd say for our trust. Because the truth is that the master we serve, the master we love, the master we devote ourselves to, it seems to me, that reveals the master in whom we are placing our trust. And so the real reason we can't live below our means is often, again, there are exceptions, I've acknowledged that, but often it is because we are serving the wrong master, we are trusting the wrong master, we have come to believe that money and what money can buy holds the key to our happiness, our meaning, and our contentment. But money and what it can buy, here's what it does in reality. It promises what it cannot deliver. And so when it becomes the focus of our hope and trust, we always end up disappointed, discouraged, and even often we're disillusioned. But when we finally allow Jesus to be our true Lord, and when we finally come to the place where we place our full trust in Him, everything falls into place, and we are able to be content, as Paul said, through Christ who gives us strength. And then we can live in the reality of Matthew 6:25 through 34. Don't worry about your life, what you'll eat or drink, your body, what you'll wear. Is not life more important than food? The body more important than clothes, and TVs and houses and vacations and eating out? Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things, enough. Not everything you could ever dream of, but enough will be given to you as well. Now, verses 25 through 34 say much more than that. But at the foundation of those verses, and I encourage you to read through them today, is a way of living that is satisfied with basic things in life, because we realize that life is about more than stuff, and we realize that God is trustworthy and will provide what we really need. I think it's a fair summary of Matthew, those verses 6:25 through 34, to say that embracing them leads us to a place where we are satisfied with enough, not excess, because we are truly satisfied in and by God Himself. And so this means that living below our means is actually a more spiritually weighty topic than what we might initially think. Amen. Because the contentment that allows us to live below our means is connected to how satisfied we are in Christ Himself. And so the question that lies at the heart of our relationship with money and possessions is this one: is Jesus enough? Are we satisfied with Jesus? Just like I shared a couple of weeks ago, is Jesus the true resting place of our hearts? When Jesus is enough for us, we'll be content with living below our means. And when we live below our means, when we don't consume everything, then we are able to properly honor God in our finances, and ultimately we personally will end up better off financially because while we may not have everything we want, living below our means brings financial freedom. Amen. So the key to living below our means is contentment. The key to contentment is Jesus. Is Jesus enough? It is the question at the heart of our relationship to money and the things that money can buy. Why don't you stand?